Hey everyone, in this video, we'll be discussing Bangladesh's catastrophic climate and the toll it's taken on the Bangladeshi people. About a third of the country lives in the coastal land with an average elevation below 1.5 meters, making a large amount of the population at risk of inland flooding. Add this to the rising sea level in the Bay of Bengal and the increase in population, and millions of livelihoods are threatened. Since 40% of the population lives on less than $1.25 a day, combating these issues has been really difficult. This has been affecting the farming community disproportionately, which has also had devastating effects on Bangladesh, as 15% of the GDP ties into agriculture. Within the farming community, inland flooding has already occurred. Paired with the aforementioned population growth and inadequate land management, the farmers have been struggling to find arable land and meet the production needs of a growing population. In particular, 80,000 hectares of farmable land are being lost each year due to flooding, erosion, and salinization. Imagine being part of the farming community and losing 150,000 American football fields worth of suitable farming land each year. This is essentially becoming a positive feedback loop, as population growth is feeding into the loss of arable land. The result of this cycle is that food insecurity will become more and more prevalent. The monsoon season lasts from June to October, and during this period, extreme flooding damages crops, infrastructure, and households, and many areas remain under 6 feet of water throughout the season. In communities that primarily depend on farming, up to 80% of the labor force can be left unemployed. A community's ability to adapt and mitigate these issues are all dependent on education and income level, farming experience, and access to resources. So adaptation techniques should be promoted in areas where high levels of vulnerability are present. Food insecurity is a huge problem, especially in more remote areas of the Chittagong Hill Tracts that rely heavily on rice agriculture. Families run out of stocks between June and August when the monsoon season and the pre-harvest season overlap, leaving many individuals hungry and vulnerable. All in all, the farming community has a high vulnerability due to its increased exposure and sensitivity.
In order to decrease this vulnerability, the Bangladeshi government has been focusing on increasing the farming community's adaptive capacity. In order to adapt, the government has been pushing farmers to switch to shrimp farming. Shrimp are able to survive in salt water, making it useful for the farmers losing land to salinization. The farmers then sell them at local markets to buyers who ship them to Dhaka, the nation's capital. Shrimp farming currently makes up a huge proportion of the economic sector of Bangladesh. In 2006, Bangladesh exported over 49,000 tons of prawn and shrimp valued at roughly $415 million. In some locations, farmers even deliberately salinated their lands with salt water so that they could farm shrimp rather than crops, because shrimp farming is more sustainable and more secure. While this has proven to be beneficial in the short term, salinating the land is shown to be problematic for the environment. In addition to the huge loss in biodiversity from both a wildlife and agrodiversity perspective, the salinity has also polluted local groundwater, making it difficult for citizens to access safe drinking water. In turn, this puts the farmers of Bangladesh into a vicious cycle where they are able to adapt in the short term, but puts them at an even bigger disadvantage in the long term.
Another strategy farmers are currently implementing to decrease vulnerability is a new technique that works on chars or sandbars where all the soil has already eroded. The farmers dig out holes in the char sandbars, fill them with locally made natural compost, and plant produce. Then this produce is preserved and sold during the monsoon season, providing a relatively steady income throughout the year, as well as further reducing vulnerability in terms of food security during monsoon season. Furthermore, this option is looking especially hopeful because there is currently 1 million hectares of available char lands present in the country that could be used to grow food. In the past, these lands were occupied by the rich wanting coastal land. However, recently, the State Minister for Housing and Public Works have allocated the land to farmers who have been negatively affected by climate change. In essence, the heart of this adaptation technique is that the farmers are taking land that previously would not be thought of as usable, changing their framework of what usable land is, implementing new techniques, and creating more arable land for future use. Currently, however, these adaptations are limited due to the spread and expansion of urban development. This has reduced the amount of arable land for farmers and increased the overall need for food and resources in Bangladesh. The current adaptation plans for farmers of Bangladesh fail to act in a transformative way and fail to address the actual issues. They are mainly methods that continue the vicious cycle and allow for people to continue with their livelihoods in a similar fashion. One of the current largest failures is the lack of enforcement for policies. This has been highlighted by the fact that the strict limitations on urban development provided by the current adaptation plan given by the national government have not been enforced by local governments and thus are hollow words. This is further complicated by a lack of discourse between the individuals in need of aid, the city planners, and the decision makers. This discourse is essentially adding to the amount of overall future adaptation work and planning that will be required. This is clearly what results from poor policy enforcement and can be seen in the resulting growing population of poor individuals that live in hazardous coastal areas. On top of the lack of discourse between the people and the policymakers, the current and future adaptive capacity of Bangladesh is further limited by its economic resources. Bangladesh has a fairly low GDP per capita of $1,516, meaning economic resources are limited across the board, resulting in not enough funding for climate change mitigation and adaptation. To combat the lack of funding, there are possibilities for the government of Bangladesh to partner with NGOs or even other governments. It is clear, however, that the Bangladesh government has failed farmers as policies are not protecting them or acknowledging their struggles. There is a lack of representation at the national level for farmers and an overall lack of understanding regarding their issues. This lack of collaboration between farmers and the individuals within the government has resulted in programs that have no meaningful impact, with the needs of the farmers not being met. There is a future capacity to build this collaboration and more efficiently act on their strategies to meet their needs and individual needs. These solutions would allow the farming communities to be involved in the government's decision-making. While coastal cities fall deeper into the depths of climate change, the farmers of Bangladesh will continue to show their resilience in the hopes that it will pay off. In conclusion, although the farming community in Bangladesh is struggling to adapt to the effects of climate change, there are many new initiatives that have been enacted, and with governmental support, farmers' livelihoods could drastically improve. With increased funding from NGOs and the new funding programs from the Finance Ministry, the financial capacity will continue to increase to aid in adapting their farming practices. Although it might be too late to stop the flooding, it is not too late to adapt and mitigate these issues and protect future generations.